President Trump announces the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of the Islamic State. What does this mean for the fight in Syria against ISIS? What does it mean for Trump's foreign policy? How did the media react to this? We've got that and oh so much more coming up on the Buck Sexton Show. Welcome. President Trump made an announcement. Please play.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of ISIS, the most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world. The United States has been searching for Baghdadi for many years. Capturing or killing Baghdadi has been the top national security priority of my administration. U.S. Special Operations Forces executed a dangerous and daring nighttime raid in northwestern Syria and accomplished their mission in grand style. The U.S. personnel were incredible. I got to watch much of it. No personnel were lost in the operation, while a large number of Baghdadi's fighters and companions were killed with him.
President Trump telling the nation, telling the world, the very good news that the leader of the Islamic State is no more. These days, in our incredibly polarized political climate, there are very few moments, very few opportunities when you would expect there to be a true bipartisan coming together. But I remember, and the parallels between these two incidents will be a theme as we discuss this today. I remember when, under the Obama administration, Osama bin Laden was killed. And I remember that announcement, seeing on TV jubilant reporters, seeing people dancing in the streets chanting USA, USA. And now, understandably, there was a greater psychological attachment, a greater sense of justice delivered when UBL was killed because he was the mastermind of the 9/11 attacks that killed almost 3,000 of our fellow Americans. But there was an understanding that this was a good thing, that justice had been delivered, and there was something of a respite from the nasty partisan politics that define almost everything in the news these days. You would think that when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is taken out by U.S. special operators, people keep saying special forces, I've seen it reported as Delta Force, but when this happens, shouldn't we have a pause in the partisan warfare? Shouldn't we have a moment where we say, enough is enough with all of that? This was a good thing. First line of credit goes to our military, goes to those in the special operations community who very clearly put their lives in the line for this raid and for many other raids and just in the day-to-day national security protection of this country. But the credit does make its way up to those who gave the order. The credit also filters through the intelligence community, which I think these days could certainly use quite a bit more public confidence and respect, given the way that it has been shamelessly politicized against President Trump. But simply put, my friends, this is a big win. It's a win for America, for Trump, for special operations, for the intelligence community, and for Syria, the Middle East, the world, human decency, basic human rights, any sense of justice. This guy was a monster. This individual was a rapist, a mass murderer, a torturer, a sadist, and yet the way that the press reported on him was such a window into what they really care about and what they really think. Astonishing stuff. Hard to believe, and I truly mean that. Over the weekend, I was at Politicon in Nashville, which was a fun event. It was mostly fun for me to see some members of Team Buck who showed up, and thank you so much for those of you who did, but also to see some of my media peers. I have to tell you, this headline, which has gotten so much attention from the Washington Post, was so bizarre, so amoral, and just it's hard to explain how anyone could think this way. But the Washington Post initially called Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi a terrorist in chief. I responded on Twitter yesterday to this because they changed that headline to the following: Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, austere religious scholar at helm of Islamic State, dies at 48. Yeah, austere. You could say he was pretty strict. You know, he would, saw your head off if you didn't do what he wanted. So I guess that's one description of him, austere religious scholar. Now, the Post had to walk this back, change the headline right away. But that was not the only place, I would note, where there were very strange descriptions in what was a Washington Post obituary of a butcher of men, women, and children in the Middle East, doing so under the mantle of Islam, bringing tens of thousands of recruits, okay? This isn't, I know in this country, if you have a white nationalist rally somewhere with 10 morons who show up, we're told that they're about to overthrow the country. Meanwhile, when you're looking at the Islamic State, you actually had a jihadist who brought together tens of thousands of recruits from all over the world, took over an area that reigned over at least 3 or 4 million inhabitants, and required a multinational coalition, led, of course, by the United States, but also with some very good ground fighting from our friends, the Kurds, on the ground. But as terrible a human being as you're going to find anywhere. And the Washington Post, in its obituary of this Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, referred to him, wrote, quote, Mr. Baghdadi maintained a canny pragmatism, end quote. I guess enslavement, genocide, mass murder, some people would find a way to describe that as pragmatic, if you're a psychopath. Another quote from the obituary: acquaintances would remember him as a shy, nearsighted youth who liked soccer but preferred to spend his free time at the local mosque. Now, end quote. You could tell me that, Buck, come on, they're doing an obituary. They're trying to give a full picture of who this monster was. They understand that. As I read through this obituary, I could not help but think that if they were writing an obituary, if the Washington Post is writing an obituary of, say, Brett Kavanaugh, there would have been more acid-tongued attacks. There would have been more nasty, undermining viciousness about a future Kavanaugh obituary, for example, than you would see in this piece about a mass murderer. Not about an entirely decent and brilliant family man who is the worst nightmare of liberals precisely because of his intellect, his morality, and his decency. No. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, they can find another way to look at him. If you think that that's the only case, by the way, I would bring you the way that Bloomberg, another major news outlet, multi-billion dollar, these are huge news outlets, employing thousands of journalists, tremendous resources. How about just terrorist mastermind killed? Congrats, special forces or special operations. Congrats, U.S. military and the Trump White House. Sorry, they get credit for this. The same way that Obama did his whole walk out in front of the microphone and look what I did. Bin Laden's gone. I'm amazing. Now, that covered up for a tremendous amount of incompetence in the counterterrorism fight from the Obama administration. In fact, it was reported that some of the SEALs that were a part of that raid on Bin Laden's compound said afterwards, we just got Obama reelected by taking out Osama. And I think that there was some degree of truth to that. I don't think it was wholly the case that was why Obama got reelected. But a major line of attack on foreign policy matters would have been the ineptitude and the inability of the Obama administration to even see who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. It was a way to shut down that criticism at a key moment for the Obama administration. They shut it down by saying, oh, I'm sorry, Obama, the guy who killed bin Laden, isn't tough enough on terrorists. Well, no, actually, it turned out he wasn't tough enough on terrorists. Do you remember all the mass casualty attacks that were happening abroad and here at home? jihadist attacks inspired by the Islamic State? No, I don't think he was tough enough on terrorism. They always pointed also to his usage of drones. Well, that was because we were being told that drones were a precision tactic and that was all that was needed. Of course, that wasn't all that was needed. Drones are not a strategy, and drones come with their own collateral damage and issues. But Bloomberg tweeted out the following about Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi transformed himself from a little-known teacher of Quranic recitation into the self-proclaimed ruler of an entity that covered swaths of Syria and Iraq. Wow. I wonder what his favorite color was. Did he have a cat? What was the cat's name? This is how they talk about as vicious a terrorist mastermind as you would find anywhere. As vicious as bin Laden, just didn't manage to get in a sneak attack on us before we knew we were at war. But as vicious as Osama bin Laden. In fact, the Islamic State used tactics that were so severe, so extreme, that there were even al-Qaeda members who reportedly felt that it might be too much. It might turn some members of the Ummah, the Islamic community, against the Islamic State. And yet here we have reporters in more than one instance, and also, and I'm about to get into this is just the way they report on Baghdadi. I will transfer this into how did they factor Trump into all this, and then we'll discuss what does this mean about Syria. Wasn't it just a week ago we were being told that Trump had no idea what he was doing in Syria? He's ruined everything. He's left all the Kurds to die. The whole region's up in flames now because of Trump. All this hysteria from so-called foreign policy experts. I would note, my dear friends and colleagues here in the Freedom Hut with me, did we take that position? Were we in hysterics about how the counterterrorism fight is over because of Trump's decision? How everything has fallen apart? We've lost all of our gains. We've abandoned the Kurds for all eternity. We've handed over all of our credibility to the Turks and the Russians. Were we taking that position? Who looks foolish this week? Not us. Not in here. A lot of other people, though. Perhaps it's because some of us actually worked on these issues and have an understanding of the underlying dynamics and also have some interest in the history, not just of the region, but of U.S. actions in the region and what comes as a result of them in the immediate and long term. Make no mistake about it. This was a big win for America, for civilization, really. It does not end the fight against terrorism. It does not even end the fight against the Islamic State. But it is an important moral and psychological victory in a battle that is largely moral and psychological. But the media wasn't really necessarily sure what team they were on sometimes, were they? How do we report on this? Don't want this to be too much of a win for Trump. Let's focus on that for a moment. How does Trump factor in to what is the single biggest takeout of a terrorist since bin Laden, and is certainly on the same plane as the mission against Osama bin Laden? But what do they think of Trump in this whole thing?
Baghdadi and the losers who worked for him, and losers they are. They had no idea what they were getting into. In some cases, they were very frightened puppies. In other cases, they were hardcore killers.
President Trump minced no words when he was talking about the operation against Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and also, I'll refer to him as al-Baghdadi. Of course, that means the guy from Baghdad. It's not really his name, so to speak, but it's really a place name that he took as part of his nom de guerre. But Baghdadi did not die well, and the president had no problem telling the entire world about this. Producer Mark, please play clip 10 where the president gives some specifics about this.
He died after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and screaming all the way.
Whimpering and crying and screaming all the way. I believe he also went on to say that he died like a oh, here we go. Play 13. He did say.
One who has caused so much hardship and death. A brutal killer. One who has caused so much hardship and death has violently been eliminated. He will never again harm another innocent man, woman, or child. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
Died like a dog, the president said. This then resulted in the usual people coming out of the woodwork to say that this was a bad idea, that there should not be this kind of spiking of the football. And in fact, I saw some supposed national security experts saying that in comparison to what happened with bin Laden, this is there are far too many details that are being shared. This was a pathetic criticism that was initially, because the first impulse of many people in the media was not, oh, wow, this thing happened. What does this mean for Syria and for the region and for America? The first impulse is, oh, no, this is a Trump win. How do we make it seem like not as much of a Trump win? It is clear from the way it was reported. It's clear from the analysis pieces as well as the hard news. The first concern of American journalists writing about this, by and large, was to make sure that Trump did not get a big win out of this, that also there wasn't a sense of whiplash in the public from Trump has ruined our Syria policy. Oh, wait, he just called for the mission to get rid of the head of the Islamic State. What do we do now? How do we spin that now? Primary concern. And this is why people don't trust the press, why they don't trust the media, because they should not trust the press. They should not trust the media. They show you who they are time and again. As Bush once said, fool me once, can't get fooled again. You know? That's how Bush said it. I kind of like the way he said it. I also think that his usage of the term decider was excellent. And then there was, what was the word that he made up a word, and it was a great word, and I'm forgetting what it was now. Misunderestimated. He was misunderestimated, that is for sure. The truth here is that President Trump does get credit, should get credit from any fair-minded press and any fair-minded American, but there's a desperate attempt to make it seem like this is something other than that. The comparison to the bin Laden raid that I've seen many in the media making is interesting because they say Trump gave away too many details. Trump gave away too many details of this raid? The bin Laden raid, there were orders from the Obama administration to basically just sit down and like open up the books and tell the Zero Dark 30 filmmakers whatever they wanted to know. People were writing books about the whole thing. I mean, it was leaking like it wasn't even leaks. They were told to do it, just sharing all the information.
He was a sick and depraved man, and now he's gone. Baghdadi was vicious and violent, and he died in a vicious and violent way as a coward, running and crying.
Now, people are claiming as well that there's the secrecy complaint. There were all that you could almost line them up right away after this, within hours of this, within minutes of this raid, which any normal person would react to with, wow, that's great work by the military intelligence community and good call, President Trump. That's really it. Maybe start chanting USA on the streets or wherever you are if you want. But that's the way normal people react. Instead, the way the press reacts is to sort of try to be fair to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi and be as unfair as possible to President Trump in terms of the credit that he would get in this circumstance. There were complaints about secrecy around this, that the president isn't allowed to talk about the raid. Well, the raid already happened. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's dead. They're announcing that the raid happened. Trump wasn't giving away any tactics, techniques, or procedures. Trump wasn't giving away anything that would help the enemy next time. I heard the press conference. He's saying, yeah, they chased him down a tunnel. Guess what? The bad guys know Abu Bakr is dead. They sent a big detachment of special operations to go get him. This is not some, that once it's happened, doesn't remain some big secret. You know, we're not trying to hide this from ISIS. They're well aware of it. But another criticism that I thought was just so clear in its desperation, the desperation of preventing a full benefit, political benefit for President Trump out of this whole situation, was that there was a lack of respect that Trump showed by the way he talked about this. And I even saw, I think it was the former, and I worked for Morell at the CIA, the former deputy director there. I remember, I think he was one that went on CBS and said, you know, that there were such an effort to be respectful to bin Laden and they gave him an Islamic burial. Okay, that's one way to see it. There's also they blew his head off, took photos of him, and then dumped his body in the ocean. So there's that. I'm not sure that there's any jihadist who's going to say, whoa, they were really... First of all, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi suicided himself with a suicide vest. We didn't even get into that detail yet. Killed 3 of his own children, reportedly. Ran into a tunnel, brought kids with him. It's gonna be tough for him when he wakes up after his so-called martyrdom. And there's no virgins. There's something else waiting for him on the other side. I can assure you of that. But the complaints about this, like we weren't as gentle or as gentlemanly, I should say, with Abu Bakr because Trump is in charge as he were with bin Laden. The SEALs blew a hole in bin Laden's head, and then the military dumped his body at sea after what was reportedly a brief, Islamic ritual. Not exactly a warm and fuzzy situation, as it shouldn't have been. Right? They went in, they killed this guy. I mean, war is hell. He's not even a warrior. He's a terrorist. End of story. What's the big problem here? But they were looking for ways, looking for things to say, anything that could convince the general public, or really just that would feed the mania of Democrats and anti-Trumpers out there that it's not possible for Trump to do anything that's really good. And that's what you saw from the press here. There must be, even when Trump, sometimes we'll make jokes about how if Trump were to cure cancer, if Trump came out and said, hey, my administration, working with the CDC and private researchers, we have cured all cancer. We joke around, and we're not even really that much joking these days. We joke around that there would be think pieces on Vox.com of, why cancer has an important Darwinian role. I mean, there would be crazy stuff because anything Trump does can't be good. So you have to find some way, to frame it so that Trump is the worst person in history is still the takeaway for that audience. And that was happening even with this, even in this moment of time. It's sad to see this, and it was particularly sad that it wasn't just the press. Now, Washington, D.C., where I used to live, I've lived a good chunk of my life in Washington, D.C., so I know the swamp very well. I know the swamp creatures far too well. And D.C., because it is largely now, the population of D.C. is an appendage of federal government largesse. They are there, generally speaking, because of all of the money, the consolidation of power and money in our federal capital. This is not what the founders had in mind. This is not the way it's supposed to be, but unfortunately, there's a reason why I think it might even be 7 of the top 10 wealthiest counties per capita in the United States just ring Washington, D.C. And you got to go out in the suburbs to get your multi-million-dollar mansion if you're a contractor or a lobbyist or someone whose real job is essentially influence peddling inside the Beltway. But over 94%, I think it was. It's definitely over 90. I think it was over 94%. Might have even been 96% of Washington, D.C. voters went for Hillary Clinton in the last election who worked for the federal government. So if you worked for the federal government and you were living in Washington, D.C., you went for Hillary. D.C. is a political monoculture for the permanent state, right? Not just for the deep state, but the permanent state, the bureaucracy. And you got a sense of that when last night President Trump was at, and producer Mark, fortunately, likes baseball. So he had to tell me that there was this World Series going on, and apparently the D.C. team is in it. The Nats, which sounds like a bunch of small flies.
Do you not even know the name of the Washington team?
Yeah, the Nationals. No,
Okay.
I'm hip. I know the things.
Oh, okay.
But there was this moment last night when the President of the United States is at a baseball game right after the announcement of, or within hours of the announcement that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has been killed by our elite military. And this is how people in our nation's capital, some of them at least, responded. Play clip 18, please. There was booing. There were people there chanting, "Lock him up," about the President of the United States. Now, it goes without saying these people are childish and they're morons. But unfortunately, they're all over D.C., and they think they're really wise and superior intellectually. They think that they're the ones. They think they're moral, too. They're better than the people that would at least give the president his due over what just happened in Syria. Oh, and if that... So that's disturbing, it's upsetting, but it's not surprising. It's not surprising. And can you imagine what the response would have been if the same day of the UBL raid, you had had a big chunk of a sports stadium chanting, "Lock him up," or, send him to prison, or just booing Barack Obama? Can you imagine what the press reaction would be? This is just supposed to take it in stride. Americans booing their president on a day like that. I guess they have very little recollection, it seems, of the torture videos, the electrocutions, the head chopping, decapitations, just the cruelty within the Islamic State that was a clarion call to tens of thousands of people in the Islamic world. Some very interesting questions still to be answered about how that happens, how within a religious tradition there are that many people who, when they hear that there's someone who's raping women, raping in some cases small children, as the Islamic State was also doing. There was rampant pedophilia among some of the senior leadership, underage girls. Right? The atrocities that were committed by the Islamic State are horrific beyond words, and yet there are people rushing from around the world to join them. In some cases from European countries, from our own country. Join this group. Be a part of this group. No, that Abu Bakr was chased into a corner and blew himself up while killing 3 of his own children is a fitting end to a group that is beyond and beneath contempt. And we can't focus on that enemy together as a country. We have to have the elites sneering at Trump. We have to have people in the press telling us that this wasn't such a great thing that Trump did because of X, Y, or Z. This is pathetic. These people are sick. The press I'm talking about now. The austere scholar Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi brought together, as Bloomberg says, this whole area under his Quranic recitations. Wow. I guess they're kind of impressed by him. And yet we know how they would respond, how they have responded to what should be a moment of true bipartisan unity, because they can't see beyond anything other than their Trump hatred. The Washington Post, the New York Times, CNN, these places have destroyed themselves. To anybody who has open eyes and any sense of judgment whatsoever, those organizations have made a mockery of themselves now. And they're doing harm to the country. They're not telling the truth. They're not truth tellers. They are lying about their partisanship and inflicting a very shockingly brazen propaganda on the American people on a day-to-day basis, even in moments like this. What does this mean for the Islamic State? I mean, I don't want to do too much of just how Trump derangement syndrome affected this, because it certainly did. It affected the way the media and many people across the country saw this event. What is the truth of what happens now in the Islamic State? And also, I want to get into a bit of what this means for Syria policy.
The operation was conducted last night. The president approved a raid onto the target. The aim was to capture Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and if we couldn't capture him, then of course we were going to kill him. And like I said, the raid was successful. We pulled our troops out. We had 2 minor injuries to our soldiers, but a very successful, flawless raid.
Now we get into the discussion we've had many times before. In fact, it's the discussion that I know a bit about, having been at the CIA during the takeout of numerous high-value targets in Iraq and Afghanistan. What does this mean for the fight against the Islamic State? What does it mean for the insurgency campaign that is currently being waged, or counterterrorism operations? These are largely one and the same in Syria. The truth is, we don't know. You don't know until after it happens. One of the best parts of this, if you're looking at it from a tactical and operational perspective. The best part of it is that there's other than the psychological benefits and the sense of justice, now as we look at what happened, we also have the information exploitation that occurs. They were able to seize, no doubt, a lot of sensitive documents. Who knows who they may be able to track down as a result of this. There's been all this focus on how they managed to track Baghdadi down in the first place. People find that interesting. I find much more, they took out a courier and they managed to track him, and it was just good intelligence work, which is really investigative work. The difference between finding a terrorist hiding in Idlib in northwest Syria and finding a cartel leader in the highlands of Mexico, it's really quite similar. You use the tools you have to try and get a positive ID on where the subject may be. You try to track them down. You have to then bring kinetic efforts to bear to actually grab them or take them out. So it's really investigative work. That part of it it's from what we know right now, seems to be pretty textbook. They found some people that were close enough to him. They then tracked down his location. They knew where he would be. The reports are that he didn't move for a while. They were hoping to catch him on the move because this raid was going to be dangerous. There were going to be a lot of fighters around trying to defend him. I haven't seen the casualty figures for the other side yet, but I can assume that our special operators went in at night and were taking out a lot of guys before they even got close to Baghdadi. There is a part of me that wishes that one of ours had been able to take the final shot like they did with bin Laden, but I suppose we have to be content with Baghdadi obliterating himself, leaving him also casualties of his own children in the process. I mean, it really tells you what a psychopath you were dealing with here. And also the need for fundamentalist Islamic belief for a jihadist in this process. How could a person do this unless they believe that they had some celestial justification for it? It just defies any reason or logic. You're going to bring your 3 kids with you and blow them up? But what does it mean for fighting the Islamic State? They've already talked about the person who will be taking over. They have this new leader, and this is another way. This is a legitimate way, but another way of taking the focus off the raid. Initially, Abdullah Kardash, who's also known as Haji Abdullah Al-Afari, was nominated, they say, back in August to run the Islamic State. So how much of the day-to-day was Baghdadi really running, we don't know, or at least we in the public don't necessarily know. But there is now this Kardash fellow who could be every bit as evil, could be even perhaps more capable as a terrorist leader. We'll have to see. I do recall that after the death, again, because of special operators and some very good work in Iraq, of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, you had an escalation of the violence in Iraq and the insurgency, and things got substantially worse from a security standpoint. So just killing Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was not the head of the snake has been cut off, therefore the rest of the body is not a danger. You have to think of insurgency and even HVTs or high-value targets. It's like you're dealing with a hydra. Remember the creature from Greek mythology with many, many different heads to it? Still useful to chop off a hydra's head, but you got to chop off a lot of them, and you still have to deal with the body. That's perhaps a better way to consider what has happened here. The Islamic State is clearly under a lot of pressure because of the campaign that the Trump administration has waged since he came into office, which he also does not get sufficient, as commander-in-chief, he does not get sufficient credit for that decision-making. Right? The credit for the raids, the credit for valor and bravery always goes to our military. That's one component of all this. That's just period, full stop. The credit for decision-making, if we're going to talk about that, strategy, decision-making, command, and responsibility, that goes to the people that are making those high-level calls. And in this case, that's President Trump. And as much as they may try to muddy the waters, make that not as clear, they can't change the fact that it is because of a Trump administration decision that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi no longer walks the earth today. But there's a broader piece here about foreign policy, too. What does this mean when we are always being told that President Trump is incompetent, he's endangering the world, he doesn't know what he's doing? He knew what he was doing here. Where else does he know?